Imagine it's February 17th, 2021. You're a 34-year-old nurse in Houston, Texas. Your shift ended 6 hours ago. You drove home through sleet. The roads were wrong. Wrong for Texas, wrong for February, wrong for a state that built its entire infrastructure around the assumption that this would never happen. You get inside, you turn up the heat, then the power goes out. That's fine, you think. It'll come back in an hour. You've seen outages before. You pick up your phone, full battery. You text your sister. You scroll the news. The grid has failed. Rolling blackouts, they're calling them, except there's nothing rolling about it. Half the state is simply dark. Outside, the temperature is 11 degrees. By morning, your phone is at 22%. You've been using it for everything: flashlight, news updates, weather radar, your family's phone numbers, which you haven't memorized because why would you? They're all right there in your contacts. Your heat is gone. Your pipes are beginning to make sounds you don't like. You need to reach your neighbor down the street, an older man who lives alone. You don't know his number. You never needed to know it. You just walked over. But you can't walk over now because the roads are ice and it's 8 degrees. You check your phone again, 14%. You have a charger. The charger requires an outlet. The outlet requires the grid. The grid is gone. Over the next 72 hours, at least 246 Texans will die. Some from hypothermia, some from carbon monoxide poisoning from improvised heating, some from medical equipment that lost power. Nearly all of them were in the same situation you are right now. They had full phones on February 15th. By February 17th, those phones were dead weight. This is not a story about a freak storm. This is a story about a belief so deeply embedded in modern life that most people have never examined it. The belief that a smartphone is a survival tool, that when things go wrong, the phone is what saves you. That belief has never been tested by a real, sustained infrastructure failure. And in 2021, Texas tested it. The result was not what people expected. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Let's begin with what most people believe about their phones. The assumption runs something like this. My phone has GPS, it has maps, it has contact information for everyone I know, it has weather alerts, emergency broadcasts, news, and a flashlight. It can connect me to emergency services. It can tell me what to do and how to get there. In normal conditions, this is correct. In normal conditions, a smartphone is one of the most powerful tools a person has ever carried. The mistake is the phrase normal conditions. A smartphone is not a self-contained survival device. It is a terminal, a screen with a radio inside it. Its usefulness depends entirely on two things: its battery and the network infrastructure that gives it meaning. Remove either one, and you have a rectangle of glass that can tell you nothing. The battery is the first constraint. The average smartphone, used moderately, lasts 1 day on a full charge. Under stress conditions, constant flashlight use, location searching, emergency broadcast streaming, that window narrows to 6 or 8 hours. In a multi-day blackout, most people's phones are dead within 36 hours. Earlier, if they're using them for heat, for light, for the desperate scrolling that stress produces. The network is the second constraint, and this is the one most people never think about. Cell towers are powered by the grid. When the grid goes down, towers switch to backup power, diesel generators, and battery systems. These backups are not indefinite. The FCC requires towers to maintain 4 hours of backup power. Some carriers exceed this, but in a sustained regional outage, diesel deliveries stop. Fuel runs out, towers go dark, one by one, in a cascade that mirrors the grid failure itself. During Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico in 2017, 95% of cell towers were knocked out within 24 hours of the storm. The island lost power for the longest blackout in American history. Some communities went without electricity for 11 months. For those 11 months, a smartphone was as useful as a brick, except when someone could get to a generator, which required fuel, which required trucks, which required roads, which required power. The phone doesn't fail because it's a bad product. It fails because it was never designed to work without the infrastructure it depends on. And in a serious blackout, that infrastructure goes away. Let's examine the historical record. On August 14th, 2003, at 4:10 in the afternoon, a software bug in an Ohio power company's alarm system triggered a cascade failure across 8 states and 2 Canadian provinces. Within 2 minutes, 55 million people lost electricity across the entire northeastern United States. This was before smartphones, before iPhones. The dominant device of the era was a Nokia with a week-long battery and no internet connection. And yet the 2003 Northeast blackout was considered manageable. Why? Because people still had the tools of the pre-digital era. They had battery-powered AM/FM radios, they listened to emergency broadcasts, they had physical address books written on paper in kitchen drawers, they had physical maps in their glove compartments, they had cash in their wallets because most transactions still required it. They knew their neighbors' phone numbers because they dialed them manually enough times to remember. Most critically, they knew what was happening. Battery-powered radio kept them informed. emergency management could reach them through AM broadcast frequencies that don't require towers, that don't require the internet, that require nothing except a simple receiver and a set of batteries. Now advance the clock 20 years. Run the same failure today. In 2023, 97% of Americans own a cell phone. 85% own a smartphone. The smartphone has progressively replaced the radio, the map, the address book, the physical newspaper, the landline. It has replaced every single analog fallback that 2003's population still had. The average American household no longer owns a battery-powered radio. They don't own physical maps. Their address books are in their phones. Their children's school emergency contact is in their phones. Their doctor's after-hours number is in their phones. Their bank balance, their insurance policy number, their medical records, all of it stored behind a touchscreen that requires electricity to function and a network that requires the grid to exist. This is not a coincidence. It is the product of 20 years of deliberate design. Every app that replaces an analog tool increases convenience in normal conditions. It also increases fragility under stress. The smartphone economy is efficient. Efficiency and resilience are not the same thing. In engineering, they are often opposites. The 2021 Texas disaster is the clearest modern case study. Winter Storm Uri knocked out power to 4.5 million homes and businesses. The failure cascaded because the Texas grid operates in isolation from the national grid, a deliberate regulatory choice made decades ago to avoid federal oversight. When demand spiked and generation failed, there was no neighboring grid to pull from. The system had no redundancy by design. Within 48 hours, a clear pattern emerged. The people who managed best were not the people with the best phones. They were the people with the oldest tools. They had battery-powered or hand-crank AM/FM radios. They knew what was happening. They knew which roads were passable and which warming centers were open because local emergency management was broadcasting continuously on frequencies that didn't require a functioning grid. They had physical contact lists, written phone numbers for neighbors, family members, doctors, utility companies. When their phones died, they could still communicate if they could find a working landline, a neighbor with power, or a charging station at a community shelter. They had cash. ATMs don't work without power. Card readers don't work without power. The gas stations that stayed open, the pharmacies that had battery backup, the stores that somehow kept their doors open, many of them could only accept cash. The people without cash couldn't buy the supplies they needed even when supplies existed. They had physical maps. When GPS requires a live network and that network is down, a paper map doesn't fail. It doesn't update itself, but it tells you how to get from where you are to where you need to go. In an evacuation, that's the only information that matters. 48 hours into the storm, the digital infrastructure that most people depended on had degraded severely. The analog infrastructure, the radio, the map, the written list, the cache, was still performing exactly as it always had. Let us understand the mechanism. Modern emergency communication runs on what's called a layered system. At the top layer is the smartphone, the most capable device, the most information-dense, the most dependent on infrastructure. Below it is the cell network. Below that is landline telephone. Below that is AM/FM broadcast radio, which requires nothing except a transmitter and a receiver. Below that is shortwave radio and community emergency mesh networks. In a normal, contained disaster, a house fire, a car accident, a localized flood, the top layer works, call 911, it connects, help arrives. In a regional infrastructure failure, the top layer collapses first. Cell towers lose power. Networks degrade. The system falls back to the layer below it. If that layer doesn't exist, if the landline was canceled years ago, if the battery radio was thrown out during a move, if the physical address book was never kept, there is no fallback. The cascade goes all the way down, and what's left is nothing. FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, recommends that every household maintain a battery-powered or hand-crank emergency radio, a 72-hour supply of food and water, a physical first aid kit, cash in small bills, and a written list of emergency contacts. These recommendations have existed for decades. They existed before smartphones. They have not changed. The underlying logic hasn't changed. The technology around them has changed, but the physics of a grid failure haven't. The physics don't care about the App Store. The National Weather Service broadcasts on NOAA Weather Radio all hazards. 7 frequencies between 162.400 and 162.550 megahertz, continuous broadcast, 24 hours a day, no internet required, no cell network required, powered by dedicated backup systems that operate independently of the grid. During every major weather emergency in American history, this system has continued operating when every other communication channel failed. A NOAA-capable weather radio costs between $15 and $40. A hand-crank emergency radio that receives AM/FM and NOAA costs $20 to $50. These devices require no subscription, no account, no network, no data plan. They require batteries or the turning of a small handle. They are not glamorous. They are not smart. They cannot order dinner or call a car. They do exactly one thing. They receive audio transmissions that tell you what is happening and what to do. During a blackout, that is the only function that matters. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Here is what actually saves people in a sustained blackout. Not theory, documented history. The first thing is information. Not the internet's version of information, which requires power and towers and servers, but broadcast information. AM and FM radio stations are required by law to have backup power and are often the last communication channel standing. A battery-powered radio or hand crank radio gives you access to this channel regardless of what the grid is doing. In the 2003 blackout, the 2005 Katrina aftermath, the 2017 Puerto Rico disaster, and the 2021 Texas storm, emergency management communicated critical information, road closures, shelter locations, water safety, return-to-home advisories, via broadcast radio. The people without radios didn't know where to go. The people with radios did. The second thing is contact. Not digital contact, physical contact. A written list of 10 to 15 phone numbers, immediate family, neighbors, doctor, pharmacy, insurance company, utility emergency line, stored in a drawer, in a wallet, in a car's glove compartment. Numbers you can dial from any phone, anywhere, including a neighbor's landline or a shelter's courtesy phone. When your phone is dead and your contacts are locked inside it, you are functionally cut off from everyone you know. A piece of paper with 10 numbers on it costs nothing and weighs nothing and has never once run out of battery. The third thing is cash. In every documented blackout of more than 48 hours, the digital payment infrastructure degrades. Card readers go down, ATMs go down, but commerce doesn't stop entirely. Fuel stations with backup generators, pharmacies with essential supplies, independent stores that continue operating, they often accept only cash during extended outages. The FDIC and financial preparedness guides consistently recommend keeping a small reserve of cash in small bills at home for exactly this scenario. Not investment-grade cash, grocery run cash, enough to buy fuel, food, and medication if the grid is down and the card readers are dark. The fourth thing is light that doesn't require a screen, LED flashlights with alkaline batteries, candles for extended outages, a headlamp for hands-free use, a battery lantern for rooms. These cost less than any phone case. They don't require charging. Alkaline batteries hold charge for up to 10 years in storage. A household that maintains 2 flashlights and a supply of batteries will have light on day 3 of a blackout when every phone in the neighborhood is dark. The fifth thing is a physical map, not for every trip, not for daily navigation, for the one moment when you need to evacuate to somewhere you've never been and your GPS is offline. A state road map, a regional atlas, a printed driving route to your family's nearest emergency meeting point. Paper doesn't lose signal. Paper doesn't tell you it's recalculating. Paper doesn't require a data connection to show you where you are and where you need to go. None of these items are expensive. None of them require ongoing subscriptions or updates. All of them are available at a hardware store or a pharmacy. All of them were considered basic household necessities as recently as 20 years ago, before the smartphone replaced them in the collective imagination. Here's the uncomfortable truth beneath all of this. The smartphone did not make you safer. It made your safety conditional. Conditional on power, conditional on the cell network, conditional on data centers in states you've never been to, operating on grid connections you have no visibility into, managed by companies whose disaster preparedness you have never reviewed and have no way to verify. In 1985, if the power went out, you still had your radio. You still had your paper map. You still had your neighbor's phone number written on the wall next to the kitchen phone. Your information infrastructure was distributed. Parts of it survived almost any failure. In 2025, your information infrastructure is centralized in a single device that requires a global power and communications network to function. When that network fails, not if, when, because every grid fails eventually, your entire information environment goes dark simultaneously. This is not a criticism of technology. Smartphones are remarkable tools. This is a structural observation. The same centralization that makes them powerful makes them brittle. And the brittleness is not theoretical. It has been demonstrated repeatedly with documented casualties in living memory. The people who paid the price in Texas in 2021 were not careless people. They were people who had done what society told them to do. They updated their apps, they stored their contacts in the cloud, they canceled the landline because the phone company kept raising rates and everyone had a cell phone anyway. They threw out the old radio because the phone had a radio app. They did the rational thing in a world where the grid never fails. The grid failed, and in the gap between what they expected and what happened, in the dark and the cold, the tools they didn't have, the radio, the map, the list, the cash, became the most valuable objects in the world. History doesn't announce itself. It doesn't send a notification. It doesn't give you a 48-hour warning to update your emergency preparedness before the cascade begins. In 2003, people lost power for 2 days, and it was a manageable inconvenience because they still had analog fallbacks. In 2017, Puerto Rico lost power for nearly a year, and the analog tools were the only things that worked. In 2021, Texas lost power for a week in sub-freezing temperatures, and the death toll revealed exactly who had prepared and who had assumed the grid was permanent. The question is not whether you trust the grid. The grid is remarkable. It works 99.9% of the time. The question is what you've done for the other 0.1%. A battery radio, a written contact list, a flashlight with spare batteries, a physical map, a small cash reserve. These are not survivalist paranoia. These are the tools that every functioning household kept as a matter of course before we outsourced our entire information infrastructure to a device that requires a global network to turn on. They cost less than a single month's phone bill. They cannot be updated, they cannot be hacked, they cannot be remotely deactivated, they do not require a subscription. They work when the grid goes down, when the towers go dark, when the battery dies, when the screen cracks and the apps won't open and the contacts are locked behind a touchscreen that has become, in the cold and the dark, exactly what it always structurally was. A terminal waiting for a network that isn't there. This channel exists because the autopsies of past failures contain instructions for surviving future ones. The pattern is already in motion. The question is whether you can see it before the lights go out. If understanding the structure before it affects you matters to you, consider subscribing.